The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion was one of the premier titles of the Xbox 360 generation. To me, it was one of the first titles that really screamed, at the time, next generation. People were extremely excited for the Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion, which was announced for the PSP. The idea of having some sort of Elder Scrolls title on the PSP just seemed so far-fetched, and yet we all wanted it. And unfortunately for us, it was never to be, as the game was canceled with little fanfare, with rumors flying around as of November of 2007 that the game was dead. Very little was known about the game, with many of the details having been collected by the fine folks over at Unseen 64. The game was being developed primarily by Climax Group London out of the UK, with some help from their Los Angeles branch. The game was being developed around 2005 and into 2006, having been announced on September 28, 2006, with a goal of a spring 2007 release. A few screenshots were released of a game that looked remarkably similar to its console counterparts considering the platform, although no videos were released. The details that were released were quick to point out that the game would not be just a simple port of Oblivion. Instead, there was to be a hub world with non-playable characters. The hub would apparently change as the game's events unfolded, with your actions in-game impacting what and who might show up. Unseen 64's article notes that Climax had considered splitting the game into 2 UMDs just to have enough space. In an interview with IGN, Todd Howard, the executive producer of Oblivion, said that the game would focus on the dungeon exploration aspects rather than the walking around town parts of the console game. And while the game takes place during the Oblivion era, it does not necessarily take place in the same area, as the Oblivion crisis was happening not just in Tamriel, but in other areas as well. Travels would take place in and around High Rock. Even Daggerfall was slated to make a return. The game was reportedly shaping up really well with the gameplay developing as it should, but Unseen 64 says that there was just too little time and too little money. Climax had already switched from their own internal engine to renderware, but the project was doomed to never be seen again. Morderax on Reddit had some different plans though, seemingly stumbling across an unfinished copy of the game. And not just one, but multiple. Full credit goes to him for what you're about to see. And it is also important to mention Benefactor over at the Tamriel Foundry, who was kind enough to purchase these demos. I am running the game primarily on original PSP hardware, a PSP Go in this case, so if it looks like the footage has been blown up a lot, well, it kinda has. I've added some emulator footage as well, which should be pretty obvious to see. This build is from June 9th, 2006, months before the game was even announced. It is a fairly basic demo, and yet, despite that, you can really see what they're aiming for here. All you can really do is beat up some guys and loot some stuff in a handful of small prison dungeon zones, but man does it look good, and it even plays pretty darn good. Let's check it out. And if that was the end of the story, I would have been perfectly content. But it's not. Let's jump ahead 6 months to January 2007, and now we can see the game coming together. The game starts off with a cutscene of sorts, and your goal is to still escape the prison. It is very much similar to the other demo, but much more complicated. The areas are larger, there are more enemies, there's just simply more game here. Again, if things ended there, I would have been happy, but they don't. This build is full of content. I wouldn't say it's an alpha that could be played from start to finish, but the zones are starting to take shape. The hub world makes an appearance, populated by NPCs that can give instructions and give quests. Oblivion gates also have started to appear. There are even playable cities, although these seem to be more for fighting enemies than actually talking to people. This build is far from done, but man is it good. This is going to wrap up this first, and yes, I am saying first with a purpose, video on the Elder Scrolls Travels Oblivion. There is so much more content to find here that I couldn't possibly fit it all in this video. And as it turns out, there might be even more builds yet to discover. Do stay tuned, hit that subscribe button, because man, are we taking off here. Thanks for watching.